As we notice, the Oberheim SEM V has two envelopes. They are ADS type envelopes, that is attack, decay, sustain. Most of the time on the synthesizers, we find ADSR type envelopes, that is attack, decay, sustain, and release. On the Oberheim SEM V here, the release is found on the decay knob itself. In sound synthesis, an envelope is used to make a parameter evolve in time following the various phases of the envelope. The envelope 1 here is pre-wired to the VCA, voltage controlled amplifier. In other words, it immediately affects the way the sound volume will unwind in time from the moment a key is pushed, held, and released. For example, if I close the envelope's 3 parameters and I open only the attack around 2000 milliseconds, that is 2 seconds, therefore the sound will take 2 seconds before reaching its maximum volume once the key is pushed. However, as we heard, the sound cuts abruptly after. Once the volume could reach its maximum intensity via the attack rise, the decay will progressively decrease the sound's volume during the time showed by the potentiometer. For example, by placing this knob around 1000 milliseconds, the sound will drop to the intensity 0 in 1 second in the decay phase. The sustain, on its part, will stabilize the sound at a certain intensity so the sound doesn't drop to intensity 0. Once the sound stabilized at the intensity parametered by the sustain, if we release the key, the sound will pass in the release phase, which on the Oberheim SEM V here is managed by the decay. As a matter of fact, the release phase will have the same time as the decay phase, so it will take the sound 1 second to go down toward intensity 0 once the key released. To reach the sound envelope unwinding of an instrument such as a toy piano, you need to give a little decay, and release for that matter here on the Oberheim SEM V, by turning off the attack and the sustain. By turning on the sustain only, we will have an envelope mechanism reminding us the sound envelope principle of instruments such as organs, for instance. Envelopes can control plenty of other things than just the sound amplitude, for example, the oscillator's frequency, or in more musical terms, the sound's pitch. Let's place the oscillator 1 modulation on the envelope 1. On the latter, let's place for the moment the attack at 1000 milliseconds and turn on completely the sustain. We notice clearly that the envelope controls by default the amplitude as we have described. Now, in addition to this envelope control on the volume, let's organize it so that this envelope attack increase could also make the oscillator 1's musical pitch rise. You need to give a little modulation gain here. If we wish the envelope to have the oscillator's sound pitch rise some more, you need to provide even more modulation gain. By placing the modulation around 86% on this knob, we practically obtain an octave relation to the initial note. Let's place the attack duration between 40 and 50 milliseconds and realize the funny jumpy character at each generated note. Now, let's see how the envelope 2 can be used on the synchronized oscillator 2 frequency. Let's place right now this envelope's 2 parameters to 0. Let the oscillator 2 be heard. Use the square wave for a little variation. Synchronize the oscillator. Let's move the oscillator 2's frequency to see the synchronization's characteristic effect, which also confirms its presence. Now, let's do what's required to control this frequency via the envelope 2. You need to select the envelope 2 here and to provide gain to this modulation. For the moment, we don't see any difference since all the envelope's functions are at 0. Let's place the attack around 150 milliseconds and realize that during this short period, the synchronized oscillator's frequency changes slightly, which results in a tone change during this brief attack phase since the oscillator is synchronized. Let's adjust the decay so that there wouldn't be this cut in the return of the synchronized frequency. And here we go. We have a colored attack by the moduled oscillator's synchronization by an envelope. Let's complete this sound by controlling the filter's cutoff frequency of the low-pass filter by this same envelope 2 here. Let's adjust the modulation's gain in a positive way and adjust the resonance. In order for the sound not to be static, let's add even a little LFO modulation on the musical pitch. We must apply it on oscillator 1, even if it's oscillator 2 that we hear, since the oscillator 2's pitch is synchronized to oscillator 1. Let's dose this modulation's gain and speed. Finally, let's save this sound. You need to click here to create or choose an already present user's bank. In my case, I will take the Franco bank. You can give it a subcategory and finally a preset name. This way we can recall this preset anytime after. Now, let's take a quick look on the 3 effects found on the Oberheim SEM V. The first is a distortion module. Let's listen to its effect, first on a sine wave coming from the sub-oscillator. Let's activate the distortion. The dry-wet knob, which determines the distortion's amount in relation to the dry signal, is in fact accessible here and there. Let's lower it toward the dry so we don't hear any effect for the moment. Place the drive to the max and the damping to 0. Now let's progressively increase the dry toward the wet to hear the distortion on the signal. In fact, we see the harmonics appear and we notice the change in shape that happens to the starting sine wave. The damping function here is used to diminish the harmonics frequencies generated by the distortion. And the drive simply manages the distortion's strength. I find this distortion particularly efficient with a saw wave filtered by a bandpass filter with a fairly high resonance. A chorus module is present here. It includes the functionalities that we find on most choruses, that is, the modulation speed named rate, the repetition amount named feedback, the delay time of the moduled signal, the modulation's depth, the chorus stereo effect depth named spread. We can synchronize the chorus speed with the tempo, then the rate changes in rhythmic ratios. We can feed the chorus so that its modulation embraces the sine wave course or the noise's more anarchic movements. Finally, you will also find a delay module with an independent time delay for the left and right canal of the stereophony. The feedback manages the time that the echoes take to die out. The ping-pong function enables to oscillate the echoes from left to right, practical when the echo times are the same. The link switch here enables to link both delay channels so that any manipulation on one would be identically reproduced on the other. The damping function here enables to filter the echo's harmonics, making the latter more muffled at each repetition. Many factory presets come with these effects present on the sound. However, don't hesitate to deactivate them from time to time in order to hear the preset's starting sound. Moreover, you always have to be careful with the effects, particularly delay and chorus, because if you abuse of them in your music, your sounds could lose clearness and blur your mixes. But here, we're dealing with mixing matters which don't concern this video.